Today we are looking at a case from the very end of the 17th century, so sit back as we go to Scotland. Thomas Hunter was born in the county of Fife in Scotland in the 1670s. His father was a prosperous farmer who sent him to school and made sure that Thomas had an excellent education. Towards the end of the 17th century, Scotland had one of the most advanced education systems in Europe. Following the Reformation, the Church of Scotland placed great importance on literacy so that people could read the Bible for themselves. Parish schools had become common across much of the country, although the quality of teaching varied considerably between towns and rural areas. Boys from wealthier families could continue their education at grammar schools before attending one of Scotland's universities, such as St Andrews, Glasgow, Aberdeen or Edinburgh. University students studied a broad classical curriculum that included Latin, Greek, philosophy and logic, before specialising in subjects such as law, medicine or theology. Those intended to become ministers often remained at university for further theological study. This was the educational path that was followed by Thomas Hunter. He studied the classics at the University of St Andrews, where he graduated with a degree of Master of Arts. After this, he continued his studies in theology and made very good progress, which led many of his tutors to comment that they believed he had a promising future in the church. It was common for young men training for the ministry to serve as tutors or chaplains in wealthy households. They educated their employers' children while also carrying out religious duties, which allowed them to earn a living and gain valuable experience until they could obtain a parish of their own. Such appointments were often difficult to secure, as they depended on vacancies becoming available and the support of influential patrons, as well as favourable recommendations from senior members of the church. As a result, many aspiring ministers spent several years in private service before beginning their careers in the ministry. In 1698, Thomas entered the household of Mr Gordon, a highly respected Edinburgh merchant and one of the city's bailies. A baillie was a senior civic officer who helped govern the city, administered local justice, and held a position of considerable influence, roughly comparable to that of an alderman or magistrate in London. The Gordon household was a large and prosperous one. It included Mr and Mrs Gordon, their two young sons, and their young daughter. They employed a maid who attended Mrs Gordon, clerks who assisted Mr Gordon's business affairs, and a number of domestic servants. Thomas Hunter was entrusted with the education of the two boys, providing them with the classical education which was considered essential for children from a wealthy family. Their lessons included reading, writing, Latin, history, religious instruction, and the study of classical authors. It was all designed to prepare them for their future roles as educated gentlemen and their eventual responsibilities within society. Thomas carried out his duties well and earned the confidence and respect of the Gordon family. Mr and Mrs Gordon regarded him as an intelligent and capable young man with an excellent character and placed great trust in him as the tutor of their sons. They believed that he was a young man destined for a respectable career within the church. During this time, Thomas began a relationship with one of the domestic servants. At first, the pair managed to keep their involvement hidden from the rest of the household. Although there were rumours and gossip among some of the other servants, no one knew the true nature of their relationship, and the affair continued for some time without discovery. One day, however, Mr and Mrs Gordon were away visiting friends, so Thomas and the servant girl met together in his bedroom, as they had done on many previous occasions. On this particular day, however, they were careless enough to leave the door unlocked. Without warning, the Gordon children entered the room and discovered the pair together in circumstances that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. At first, neither Thomas nor the servant believed there was any serious cause for concern. The eldest of the boys was not yet 10 years old, and they assumed that the children were too young to fully understand what they had witnessed or to repeat it to anyone else. However, they were mistaken. Later that evening, while sitting at supper with their parents, the children innocently spoke about what they had seen. Although they may have not understood the full significance of it, their description was enough to leave Mr and Mrs Gordon in no doubt about what had taken place. The consequences were immediate, and the young servant was ordered to leave the household the following day. Thomas, however, was treated with surprising leniency. Rather than dismissing him, Mr Gordon allowed him to remain after he offered an apology for his behaviour. Thomas claimed that his actions had been the result of youthful foolishness, expressed great regrets, and promised that such conduct would never happen again. The Gordons accepted his apology, and for a time, Thomas remained in the household and continued in the position of trust that he had previously held. Outwardly, life continued much as before. Thomas remained in his position as tutor, and to those around him, it may have appeared that the matter had been settled. Privately, however, he did not accept responsibility for his own actions. Instead, he blamed the children for revealing the affair and exposing him to the shame and embarrassment that followed. Rather than directing his anger towards himself, Thomas's resentment became focused on the young witnesses, whose innocent honesty had brought his misconduct to light. Over time, the resentment grew into a deep and bitter desire for revenge. The trust that the Gordon family had placed in him was replaced by a determination to punish the children, whom he believed were responsible for his disgrace. Over time, his feeling of resentment developed into a carefully considered plan. Whenever the weather was pleasant, Thomas would take the two boys into the fields for about an hour before dinner. Their sister would often accompany them, and because this had become such a normal part of their daily life, the family had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. In August 1700, however, circumstances unexpectedly changed. The Gordon family were staying in their country residence just outside Edinburgh when Mr. and Mrs. Gordon received an invitation to dine in the city. Mrs. Gordon wished for all three of her children to accompany them, but her husband decided otherwise, and instead they took only their daughter. That afternoon, with the weather favourable, Thomas took the boys into the fields, as he had done many times before. To anyone watching, it would have appeared to have been an ordinary walk between a tutor and his pupils, and after a while, Thomas sat down on the grass, as though taking a rest, while the children wandered nearby, happily catching butterflies and gathering wildflowers. Unaware of the danger they faced, they continued playing, while Thomas prepared to carry out the revenge he had been planning. He took out a penknife and called the boys over. Instead of speaking to them as their tutor, he reminded them of the day they had discovered him with the servants and accused them of bringing shame upon him by telling their parents what they had seen. He then told them that he intended to kill them. Terrified by his words, the boys immediately tried to escape. They ran off, but Thomas pursued them, caught them both, and forced them to the ground. He then restrained one of the children while he attacked the other with his penknife. After murdering the first boy, he carried out the same terrible act upon the other. This had taken place in broad daylight, in open countryside, less than half a mile from Edinburgh Castle. Given the location and the time of day, it was very unlikely that such a crime could have been carried out without being witnessed by someone nearby, and this indeed proved to be the case. A gentleman who was walking on Castle Hill had a clear view of what was happening, and horrified by what he witnessed, he immediately raised the alarm. He gathered several other people, and they all hurried towards the scene, where the terrible discovery awaited them. The two young boys lay dead. By now Thomas had made his way towards the nearby river, so some of the group quickly pursued him, and just as he reached the water's edge, they managed to seize him. A messenger was dispatched to inform Mr. and Mrs. Gordon, who were at that moment preparing to dine with friends in Edinburgh. The news was devastating. The shock experienced by the father and the overwhelming grief of the mother were impossible to fully describe. The two children they had entrusted to Thomas's care had been brutally murdered by the very man they had welcomed into their home and trusted as their tutor. Scottish law at the time contained an ancient and rarely used provision for cases where a murderer was captured and there was unmistakable evidence of their crime. It declared that if a murderer should be taken with the blood of the murdered person on his clothes, he should be prosecuted in the sheriff's courts and executed within 3 days after the commission of the fact. Although this law was not always enforced to its full extent, Thomas Hunter's crime was considered so shocking and brutal that the authorities decided there would be no delay and no leniency. The speed of the proceedings reflected the horror with which the murders had been received by the public. When questioned by authorities, Thomas claimed that he had intended to die by his own hand after the killings, and said that he had gone to the river with the intention of throwing himself into the water, but before he could carry out his plan, a crowd had discovered him and dragged him away from the riverbank. He was taken into custody and brought to prison, where he was chained to the floor throughout the night to prevent any attempt at escape. The following day, the sheriff summoned a jury to hear the case. When Thomas appeared before the court, he did not deny his guilt. Instead, he pleaded guilty to the murders. Yet even in these final proceedings, he displayed no sign of remorse or regret. According to reports of the time, his only expressed sorrow was that he had not also killed Mr. Gordon's daughter, along with her 2 brothers. With his guilt admitted, the sheriff passed an exceptionally severe sentence. He ordered that the following day, Thomas Hunter was to be taken back to the very place where the murders had been committed, and there his execution would take place. However, the sheriff said that hanging alone was not to be the punishment. He instructed that before Thomas be executed, his right hand, the hand that he believed had carried out the murders, was to be removed with a hatchet, and only after this brutal act had been carried out would he then be hanged. Even after death, there would be no ordinary burial. The sheriff instructed that Thomas's body was to remain suspended in chains between Edinburgh and Leith, as a permanent warning to anyone who might contemplate committing a similar crime. He also ordered that the knife used in the murders was to be placed through the severed hand, which would then be fixed above the wooden structure supporting his remains. Every part of the sentence demonstrated the authorities' determination to make the man who had murdered Mr. and Mrs. Gordon's 2 sons an example of to others, showing that such a brutal crime would be met with the harshest punishment the law could impose. On the 22nd of August 1700, Thomas Hunter was executed exactly as the sheriff had ordered. Many people witnessed the execution, and to them it was a grim reminder of the severity of punishment that awaited those who committed the most violent crimes. In an age when executions were carried out publicly, such displays were intended to reinforce the authority of law and deter others from following a similar path. However, the grim spectacle caused continued distress to Mr. Gordon. The road between Edinburgh and Leith was one he frequently travelled, and each time he passed the hanging remains of the man who had murdered his sons, the memory of their deaths was brought back to him. Unable to endure the sight any longer, Mr. Gordon petitioned the sheriff for the body to be removed and placed elsewhere. His request was granted, and within a few days, Thomas Hunter's body was taken down and rehung near the small village of Broughton, on the outskirts of Edinburgh. However, it was another detail that ensured that Thomas Hunter's name would be remembered with particular horror. Just before he was executed, he made a statement that shocked everyone who was there, when he calmly said, "There is no God. I do not believe there is any. Or if there is, I hold him in defiance." To many of his contemporaries, these words were almost as disturbing as the crimes he committed. Thomas Hunter had spent years studying theology and had once appeared destined for a career as a minister of the church. Yet the man who had prepared to preach the Christian faith ended his life with a public rejection of the very beliefs that he had once studied to defend. His final words, combined with the brutality of his crimes, ensured that his name remained one associated with horror for generations afterwards. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next brief case.